Okay, I think we have most everyone has come in. And I just want to say, wow, and welcome. I'm so impressed with that you're all here today. And I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be the moderator. My name is Meryl Como, and I'm an artist, a member of Surface Design Association. And today, my role is the role of moderator. I'm on the events committee for the Surface Design Association, which is a membership nonprofit focused on contemporary fiber and textile art. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this week's Textile Talk, which is titled Textile Narratives, Vintage, Found and Transformed, with Maggy Rozycki Hiltner, Susan Lenz, and Jennifer Lee Morrow. So Textile Talk webinars are brought to you by the International Quilt Museum, the Modern Quilt Guild, the Quilt Alliance, San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, Studio Art Quilt Associates, and Surface Design Association. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping announcements before we begin the program. This is a webinar. Your screens and mics are not showing. We welcome questions, which we'll answer at the end of all of the artist presentations, not after each artist, but at the very end. So please submit your questions in the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. We're honored to bring you free and inspiring Textile Talks programming. We respectfully ask that you be courteous as you engage with speakers, moderators, and other participants. And remember that your chat comments can be seen by everyone in the webinar. So please use the Q&A for questions, the chat box for greeting others, and the survey for commentary on ways that we can improve. If you prefer not to see notifications from the chats, you can click on the chat button toggle, and that will turn them on and off. So you get to choose if you watch the chat or not. This webinar would not be possible without the support of our sponsors, who include Artistic Artifacts, Aurifil, C&T Publishing, eQuilter.com, Handy Quilter, Misty Fuse, Moda Fabrics, 9 Patch Fabrics, Schiffer Publishing, thequiltshow.com, Quilt Mania, and Empty Spools Seminars. So big applause, hand of applause. Thank you so much to our sponsors. So as you know, when you signed up for this, we have 3 presentations today. And so the 3 presenters, for all of those 3 presenters, materials matter. It is the thrill of the hunt, the serendipity of the discovery, and the buzz of appropriation that informs the studio practices of Maggy Rozycki Hiltner, Susan Lenz, and Jennifer Lee Morrow. Today, we'll hear how they find, are guided by, and transform objects to create their own stories layered onto the stories of the past. Maggy Rozycki Hiltner lives in Montana. She works with Found Embroidery and Quilts, and she serves as the regional representative for SAQA. Susan Lenz is a fiber and installation artist in South Carolina. Her work is grounded in stitches and the desire to give second life to discarded items. Jennifer Lee Morrow is a Maine-based mixed media artist with a strong interest in paper and textile techniques. So our first presenter today is Jennifer Lee Morrow. Jennifer Lee Morrow is a mixed media artist. She has a strong interest, as I've said, in paper and textile techniques. She was raised near Niagara Falls on the US side and lived in Rhode Island and Kansas before moving to Maine in 1991. For most of her time in Maine, she lived and worked on the exquisite Deer Isle. In 2017, in search for a more urban vibe, Jennifer moved to Westbrook, where she has her studio in her home. Morrow has a BFA from Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA from the University of Kansas at Lawrence. She has taught at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts and Penland School of Crafts, among other schools. Her career as an arts administrator has included being the director of Seymour Community Arts in Deer Isle, the general manager of Opera House Arts in Stonington. And she is involved in the art community through memberships of the Surface Design Association, where she is co-rep for the state of Maine, and a member of the Equity, Access, and Integration Committee. The Maine Commission, the Maine Arts Commission, the Maine Crafts Commission, the Maine Crafts Association, where she is on the board of directors, Maine Fiber Arts, and the Union of Maine Visual Artists. So Maggie, I'm going to let you take it away from there. Maggie will be sharing her screen.
Oh,
Hi there.
actually, it's
I think it's Jennifer first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it is me. So I'll share my screen now.
Before you begin, I just have to say, one of the things that I found about doing online programming is there's always some kind of snafu. So I just got it out of the way, as well as my presentations. Let's hope I don't do another one. So Jennifer.
Thank you so much. I just am going to kind of run through some images and talk over them. And please, if you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A box. I'd be happy to answer them later. So I work very intuitively. I start to gather materials from all sorts of places, including kind of walking and finding garbage and ticket stubs and images from books and tarot cards and embroideries, and other people's artwork is often fair game for me. So I just kind of gather this stuff and I pin it on my walls in my studio. And then I, start to have a conversation with it. The materials start to have a conversation and I start to have a conversation with them. And as I develop the pieces, I will often stitch things together, because that physical joining of the materials is really important to me. I think it's very different than just having things next to each other to have them stitched. I also glue and I nail and I tack and I have a lot of other tricks, but I really am based in stitching. So as these materials start to inform me, I start to then inform them, and I think about basically the things I'm thinking about in my life. So some of these things could be current events, some of them are personal, a lot of them are family-based, and I'll just let them kind of develop and see what happens and how they inform each other. And as I get closer to sort of the finish of a piece, I will start to make harder choices about those pieces. And a lot of what I do is overdo things and then take things out. And so some of my friends often get pictures saying, wait, should I leave this in or take it out? And then they'll give their opinion and then I'll do the opposite most of the time. So besides that physical joining, it's really important to me to layer different things so that nothing is untouched. I never use my materials raw. So if it's an architectural drawing in the background, I've colored over it, or I've painted on it, or if it's a piece of tissue paper, I've glued it to another piece of tissue paper, or I've cut something up and then printed another layer of flowers over it. So it's really important for me, that transformation of the materials from a found material to my material. And so some of these things I created, they're knitted pieces, they're felted pieces, there's paper of all kinds. And some of the things I just find and work with. My process is, as I said, fairly intuitive, but there is this back and forth where I really do start to have a story I want to express. And it's important to me that I do that in a way that's clear. My titles are very important to me. And so if you visit my website, you'll see everything is titled, and you may not know why it's titled what it's titled, but for me, that's an essential thing that comes around sort of the 2/3 to 3/4 mark in making the piece. Usually something suggests itself and then I'm like, okay, that's the title. So work can be about contemporary events. That this piece was done during a marriage equality campaign in Maine. That was very important to me. Some pieces are a little bit more random. The next little series of pieces are 4x4 inch squares that I did as part of a Fun a Day project, where every day in January +1 for me, we made, you made something, and I made these little squares, and then I joined them into 8 pieces that have 4 squares each, which is why I needed 32, not 31. But this was just basically taking scraps of wallpaper, photos, things that I had made for other pieces that didn't fit in. I do a lot of recycling of my own work. I will paint over things or change them, or a lot of times make things for a piece that don't end up fitting in. But then I start to work on, as I said, the content. So this piece was made around the time of the Trump election, and it's called There Is Wisdom. It's really trying to get back to the fact that as humans, we have found so many ways to make sense of our world. And I just wanted to think about that, we are people with wisdom, and I wanted to represent that and all the ways that we do that. You can see a lot of machine stitching on these pieces. I also hand stitch. I kind of do the process that works the best. I do a lot of paper cutting, which could be sort of in a decorative way or in a more specific way. I incorporate found textiles like these granny squares in this piece, which were actually made by my grandmother. And I do a lot of use of hardware as well. And all my pieces are mounted on wood, and a lot of them have alcoves in them. So this process of figuring out what's going to go where and what should get nailed together first and what needs to be done before the next thing is done is certainly part of the process. This piece includes, a shout out to my mom, a small collage that she did in that upper right-hand corner. I often incorporate work from other artists or makers of various kinds. And I always try to make it my own before I sort of finish the process. So whether that's by incorporating it with other pieces or masking it over or whatever works for me. This piece is fairly large, probably about 5 feet tall. And the central image was a drawing that my nephew did when he was probably about 7, 8, I don't know. And now he's, in college. Or it would be if it wasn't for COVID, but that kind of age in. He's an artist. So this is called Portrait of an Artist. And so this is taking that very early work and working with it, and also developing this little sculpture that went along with it that I made that was sort of a 3D version of his drawing. You can see here where I'm using wood and balsa wood and wood burning to create pattern. That background in textiles, the patterning, the stitching, that's always really important to me. So you'll see me return to it again and again. This central piece was actually painted by my daughter, and you'll see another photo of that sort of inset image. But I use staples and scraps of paper, and this was wrapping from Turkish candies, I think. I use paste papers. I use paste papers I've made. I use paste papers that other people have left behind. I'm pretty much just grab everything I can find. But the pieces take a long time, all that stitching, the wrapping, the construction. So I get to live with them, which I love. I get to live with them for a long time and learn about them and learn how to enhance what I'm trying to say. This is called Shelter in Place. It was a piece done right around the time of the beginning of COVID. And it didn't start out to be a piece about sheltering in place, but by the time it was finished, that's really where it became, what it became, and really was important to me as that transition of staying in and that safety and that longing for wider areas. You can see that a lot of my alcoves have sort of a reflective material on them. That's so that when you look into them, you also see a doubling of whatever's on the back surface. Here's a little picture of my studio, or 2 pictures. You can see actually from my background, fairly similar to today, a little bit neater maybe when I took these photos. I have flat files, which are the joy of my life. This is a small bedroom that's off our dining room. So it's probably about 10 by 12 or something. And I have put a pinnable surface on the walls so that I can kind of pin everywhere. Other than that, I don't need much. I use my sewing machine a lot. This is a little bit of a process shot. So I start by stitching together all these materials, tarot cards, calendars, some Indian prints, just whatever has come through. In this case, I then layered a piece of translucent white paper, like a thready white paper over it, and just allowed whatever bled through to bleed through. So sometimes words come through or the stitching, or sometimes nothing. And then I knit with paper yarns, another netted layer that went over that layer. So you can see, again, I'm looking for that depth and that transformation. And you'll see in a moment, this is the piece and so in the upper right-hand corner, that is the knit area. And then the rest of the main part of it is also that material that I made. Sometimes I call it making fabric, when I just stitch things together without knowing where they're going to go until later. There is a lot of, there's some dimension in my work. Most pieces are between 4 and 6 inches deep. And that allows me to hang things on them. And it also allows me those little niches that I like, and with the reflected surfaces. And that is it. So let me just stop my share. All right. Thank you very much. And I was going to do this at the beginning, but forgot. I would like to thank everybody who made this whole talk happen. And especially, I have to say, the Surface Design Association. I've become quite involved in the last few years, and it's just been really just really helped my work and helped my life. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. That was terrific. So next, Susan, you are up next. Susan Lenz stitches both by hand and machine, and also indulges in a passion for book arts and unique three-dimensional found art objects. Altering found photos is an obsession. She uses multiples of seemingly mundane objects, putting into perspective the abundance of life and our capacity to keep things as if for a rainy day. Paper clips, keys, bottle caps, buttons, nails, plastic spoons, and old clocks are found in most homes. These and so many other, often vintage items are repetitively hand-stitched into meditative patterns on sections of old quilts, bringing an extraordinary new life to otherwise everyday things. A resident of Columbia, South Carolina, her work has appeared in many national publications and numerous juried exhibitions and at fine art craft shows, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Smithsonian craft shows. She's been featured on art quilting television programs and on South Carolina's ETV's Palmetto Scene. Her work is in the permanent collection of the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. and the McKissick Museum in South Carolina. So Susan, if you can share your screen and tell us about your work.
Oh, I didn't go from the first one. Hold on.
See, we can see your.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Like many artists, I have an obsessive streak, and it's not just confined to the repetition of hand stitching. It's also found in my stash of found objects. It's a dead giveaway to, when you look at my stash, to what I collect. Okay, I'm going to go from first slide. Okay, now. Okay, I'm not doing this correctly. Let me try again. Okay, I'm not doing this correctly. Wouldn't it be typical? I've got it messed up. Can you still see?
Oh, we can see the keys right now.
Okay, great. That's the image I wanted. They're also behind me as I'm speaking. There are about 1,200 of them on this wall, tagged keys with little letters clipped from vintage sources. I definitely collect keys, but I also collect old nails and wooden thread spools and anonymous photographs and clock gears and vintage household linens. Okay, now why isn't it going to the next one? Buttons. Who doesn't like buttons? You all are seeing the buttons right now, right?
Yes, we are.
Awesome. I mean, who can't like buttons? Anyway, right before COVID shut down the entire world, I finished this super large piece on a crazy quilt. I absolutely loved it. And why is it they're going ahead without me wanting them to go ahead? Okay, well, I'll just deal with that. Anyway, I had to face the fact that when the world shut down and there was no shows to show this piece, my image of the full piece didn't look all that great on a computer screen. It was pretty flat. And I had to look at how I might be able to continue with this work using all of my favorite things that I collect, and yet add a more graphic element, something more obvious, something that would look good on a computer screen for all those visual shows. Well, I don't know how I came up with the idea of a found object mandala. It was just a harebrained idea, but it was one that took off. And I started putting found objects, hand stitching them to sections of vintage quilts. And this really fed my obsessive nature because, well, now I wasn't just looking for the same old things. I wasn't looking for one or two. I was looking for multiples. Multiples like lots of dominoes or bottle caps. Had a friend give me a whole stash of medical syringes and the caps that go with them. Wonderfully, I had another friend give me a cigar box full of Tampa Nugget cigar bands, and I laminated them and I could stitch them right on another mandala. Some of my antique things like fountain pen nibs found a place. Even a glass floral frog and vintage, what are those things called? Oh, cocktail forks. Who would have thought they would be the most wonderful embroidery supplies? I like the fact that I can take these mundane things and elevate them to the status of
My screen has Susan frozen. I don't know if that's just me.
No, she's frozen on mine too.
Okay. So I guess, Astrid, I'm going to ask you or Lucy, I guess, if there's a next step for us.
Why don't we have Susan, we wait for her to come back on, but have Maggie start the sharing for Maggie.
Okay. All right.
All right.
So Maggie, I'm going to introduce you. Thank you for being so flexible. See, there are always snafus online. It's amazing. And we've become so forgiving as people because it seems like no matter what, there is one. So welcome, Maggie, and we can't wait to see your work. So Maggie was born in 1975 and grew up in Pennsylvania. She comes from a family of makers. Her mother and grandmother's needle-pointed pillows, made quilts, and stitched their clothes and toys. Her father built odd things, cooked outrageous meals, and painted murals in their home. She earned her BFA in sculpture with a concentration in fibers from Syracuse University and was a studio assistant at Arrowmount School of Arts and Crafts in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Maggie is a full-time artist living with her husband and two daughters in Red Lodge, Montana. Her work has been included in numerous national and international exhibitions in museums and galleries and has been published in the US and abroad. All right, Maggie.
Hi everybody. the show must go on, right? So I'm going to attempt my screen share and we'll see how we do. All right, here I go. And ta-da. Okay, so thanks, Meryl, and thank you, Susan and Jennifer and Astrid and everyone at SDA, as well as the organizational participants and sponsors of Textile Talks. Like Meryl said, my name is Maggy Rozycki Hiltner, and I'm talking to you from Red Lodge, Montana. I work with found embroidery, and most of my work is hand-stitched. I began working with found materials as an art student out of necessity. I used whatever I could get my hands on. Now I'm an avid collector. I enjoy the hunt. I feel like I'm saving these discarded treasures from rotting away, uncared for or unwanted. The things I collect the most are old, outdated household linens, embroidered doilies and pillowcases, dresser scarves, and anti-macassars. I fell in love with these kitschy household goods when I lived in the Midwest in Wichita, Kansas. At first, I had just a few and I worked on top of them, adding my stitched imagery to the existing motifs. Then I came into a glut of this stuff. I came out of an antique mall in Salina, Kansas, with 3 trash bags of colorful embroidery that I got for way too cheap, and my way of working changed. I felt brave enough to cut the embroidered pieces. This was the first piece I ever made with a chopped off bit of embroidery. My aesthetic is a bit like a home ec project gone wrong, crooked mixed with super tidy. This is my little girl version of the 3 fates from Greek mythology. Here is my processing area. The blue box and the pile in front are linens scoured and ready to process. I find these at thrift stores and antique malls and yard sales. People send me boxes of their old family linens, knowing that I'll probably cut them up. The bins with the blue lids are motifs cut off the linens, and the big pile of white cloth is the blank linen left over. I try to use every bit in my work. I layer the embroideries with wonder under and another layer of white cloth to make them opaque and a bit more durable. Then they get another layer of wonder under to make them like an iron-on patch. Some people have expressed dismay that I destroy the vintage linens, but I have to tell you, I value these textiles so much. I want people to think about the countless women who made them. I want to enjoy them and transform them and give them new meaning and relevance. And maybe I can get your grandma's stitching into a museum. When I collage, I lay out my picture, fuse it down, and then hand stitch that cut edge. So when you see my work, the flowers are probably found, but I end up embroidering out a lot of the collaged bits too. I try to camouflage my colorful embroidery so it all blends together. I'm making counterfeit found embroidery. That's part of the game in the work. Which parts are found and which parts are my stitching. This is 2 panels and some details from my piece Vantage Point, a big piece about environmental and social issues. This is a super close-up of that embroidery and the collected collaged stitches and the stitching down of that stitching. This is that microcosm that I think we all get in when we're working on the details, and then you zoom back and get the big picture. And big picture of Vantage Point. This is 425 square feet of hand-stitched embroidered panels that change shape to fit the venue. I have bins of embroidery sorted by color and motif, and I have drawers of colors. I try to stick with cotton and linen in my fabrics and threads since I do a lot of fusing and ironing. One piece of melted polyester thread taught me that tough lesson. My fabrics are some commercial cottons, some household linens, and some clothes, whatever I can find that has the colors I need. And in my embroidery hunting, I find some pretty odd stuff. This giant baby pulled off a crib coverlet reminded me of the cherubs or putti in Renaissance and Baroque paintings that symbolize sacred or profane love. That led me to have them holding up the heavens in this piece that also alludes to Greek myths, Polish folklore, and scouting manuals. In my larger works, I stick a little self-portrait of myself in there. Here, I'm repairing the sky. And here's a Boy Scout. If you see a black line figure in my work, I've hand stitched them out using sewing thread or a single strand of floss in a tiny backstitch. I use lots of metaphor, lots of innuendo. Camp was supposed to be about relating to nature, but for me, it was mostly about relating to other campers. And here's that piece in real life. I sized it to be like a door or a large window. I like to make things that catch your eye from far away, but they have lots of little surprises and stories to find in the details. Again, working in stages, gathering the found embroidery, stitching out some of the characters, embroidering what I can't find. In this case, a bunch of booze bottles. And eventually the final piece. This is about my hometown of Port Providence, Pennsylvania. That centerpiece was a rowdy biker bar. In the last 5 years or so, I began collecting old quilts and quilt tops. There are tons of these in the junk stores too, devalued by their use, tattered and stained and loved to death like old velveteen rabbits. I don't care what shape they're in really, I'm looking to preserve those hand stitches. And if I don't like their color choices, I dye them black. I'm thrilled when the stitches contrast if they were done in poly threads. And I love the super dark hues of the colors that are left behind. So here we go with the quilt. There's my middle of the night scrawling sketch on a La Quinta Inn notepad. There's the embroidery prepped and sorted by color. There's the pink and yellow flower garden or hexie quilt dyed black. And the final quilt. I repair and resize the quilts as needed. I've been using the skeleton as my character right now, inspired by the bone-like quality of old linen. I look at a lot of anatomy drawings and the depictions of skeletons and skulls all through art history. The skeleton gets employed in a variety of ways in my work. You can see that Dresden plate on the left still has the ghost of color and pattern, and it's not lost. When I choose a quilt to work with, I research the pattern's history and meaning to see where it takes me. I live in the West, but I am not Western. Still, I feel compelled to feature horses. I'm working out some ideas right now about pack horses and collections and taking things with you. I find a lot of embroidered deer as well, so I loaded up one of those with story symbols too. And I try that imagery out in small sculpture as well. These are all found bits that I collected over the years. Some things are precious, like a button from my grandmother's button box. Others are just junk from the bottom of the Goodwill bin. But somehow it all becomes precious, or maybe it all becomes unprecious, so I can let it go. Ugh, this is a shot of my out of control sculpture bit drawer. And everything laid out on the table, getting ready to build. Really, this is playing. Here's a few more horses. Sewing ephemera often make it into these pieces. I try to get a few red X's in. I use the red X to sign my work, and I like it as a symbol of a tiny pinprick or pain. My embroidery collages make it onto sculpture. So up in the upper right, you see an illustration from a book about Mayan art. I love how they showed the ceramic face and then a rollout scan of the whole image at once. 3D intrigues me because you can't see it all at once. It's like it has comedic timing or something, things to reveal as you make your way around the scene. So there's my vessel and its rollout with a bit of mythology, some adolescent card-based romance, and arson. And here's my hometown again, a little portrait of my brother, my childhood home. I really do like stitching out flames. And sometimes my sculptures are me rebuilding found objects to add meaning to that object. This was the same body of work as that big camp piece I already showed you. I'm a flat flower arranger. In real life, I do it in my garden, contrasting colors and textures, doing the best I can with my 100-day growing season here in Montana. It's pretty hard on a gardener here. Here's that same bed a few days later in a freak snowstorm. And here's some more inspiration for the next pieces I want to show you. My husband started the Red Lodge Play Center 15 years ago. This residency program and gallery has filled our home with a variety of ceramic pieces. There's my daughter's hand playing with a little garter snake in a flower bed. No matter how harmless, I always jump and squeak when I see a snake. And a flower bouquet composed entirely from my backyard. All those things come together in this new work. This stitched lush garden features my uneasy love of nature. Here's some more flower arranging and stitched references to pottery. And when you see the skull in my work, it's a memento mori. Memento mori is a Latin phrase meaning remember you must die, but it's not morbid, it's a call to life. Remember, a reminder to us to eat the fruit while it's ripe, enjoy the flowers while they bloom, and to use our time wisely. Here's a few more flower arrangements, funerary wreaths. These are a little morbid, but hopefully you can also see my sense of humor in them. And a shot of me in my studio. I use foam boards to pin up the work. I work standing up most of the time or prop my bottom on the edge of a high stool. I usually thread up a dozen needles and stitch till they're empty. And that helps me remember to take breaks and look up and move around. And that's it. Thank you all so much for watching my presentation, and I hope you'll come check out my site if you want to see more.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to put my video back on again, and I think Susan is back on.
I'm here.
Susan,
I don't know what happened. I have power. I'm sitting in a big house in the middle of a capital city where the internet should be good.
okay.
But something happened.
You mind picking up where you left off?
No, not at all. I was talking about a wonderful stash of vintage Tampa Nugget cigar bands, and I laminated them so that I could just stitch them on another mandala. I had that circle already stitched and nothing for the center. But I went into my stash and lo and behold, an old rotary dial from a telephone just fit right in the middle. But go ahead on to the next image. It has vintage fountain pen nibs. I don't know why I had them. I had a whole bunch of them at one time, and they just seem to be a perfect addition to another mandala. And if you continue, this mandala was also one of those things that put together a product from a childhood idea of adults in the 1960s going to a party and using these fancy plastic cocktail corks. And what better of a middle, but a floral frog, a glass floral frog. I like the way the mundane objects can be elevated through a mandala on a vintage quilt to the level of fine art. I like the way the strong designs draw a viewer's eye in to discover what makes up that design. The silly, overlooked, often neglected things that I'm finding at auctions and thrift stores and from generous people who have donated to my stash, some of which during the unexpected break texted me to say I was frozen on the street. Well, thank you for that. But I'd like to go on and share a little bit about how I store and collect all of these found objects. This is where I live. It's a grand house, but the downstairs is my custom picture framing shop, and my husband and I live upstairs. And even though I probably should have room to be able to organize things well, my system is a system of disorganization. I have bits and pieces everywhere. We can go to the next image. This is where I actually do the stitching of the mandalas on two workhorses set up right in the middle of the living room. And of course, Ernie the cat is my cat scanner and quality control investigator. And we'll go to the next image. This is the stash of things that I'm pretty sure are going to make it into a mandala, and they're also in the living room. But elsewhere, like downstairs in the room, picture, I have an antique butterfly collecting cabinet, and it works and functions like Jin's flat files, and I love it. It isn't organized, it's just stuff in drawers. Nearby there though, next image, that's where I keep the drill and all sorts of other stuff, mostly that needs holes drilled into them so that I can stitch them onto a mandala. Next picture. Last week, I was the successful bidder at auction on a box of brand new spark plugs. And these spark plugs have made it onto a mandala. Just this morning, I added one more picture to my PowerPoint, one more that Astrid doesn't have. So as far as I can say, I hope if you'd like to see that one, like Maggie, come to my website or my blog. I've got that picture up. And finally, thank you to everybody that made this opportunity possible, and for everyone who is participating, all 668 of you. Please pardon the interruption that I so accidentally brought to this program. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you for your graciousness in the face of having been cut off right in the middle of your presentation.
I'm not crying.
It would be understandable if you did. So we have a bunch of questions in the Q&A, but I just want to ask a couple questions just to kick us off. And one of those is that there's one of the things that you all have in common is the way that you find objects and you appropriate objects. And I'm wondering, what is it about items that have had a previous life that's so compelling? I mean, I myself use things that have had a previous life. So what is it about these things that you pull together that have had a previous life that you find so compelling? Anyone, pop up.
I can answer. It comes from childhood every December, watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and they go to the island of misfit toys. There's a narrative there. That was a little doll that wanted to be loved. And I kind of look at the found objects as the misfits, and they're just looking for a home.
And Maggie?
I guess if I would talk about the found embroidery and the found quilts, I enjoy embroidering myself and appreciate and keep time with the stitch. And so when I'm out in the junk store, I just see time, and I feel those people, and I want to put them on my team with me. So I'm just enamored with the material. So.
And building on that idea of the misfit toys, one of the questions in the Q&A, Maggie, is there's a lot of imagery from childhood in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That a little bit.
Sure. I've been using I use a couple different characters in my work, but the Dick and Jane type imagery, I'm not really making work about. It's not for children. It's just like a lot of adult cartoons that are out there that has childlike imagery, but the content is actually for adults. But I think when you see images, we all have childhood in common. And so you can kind of slip into that. And also we all know that Dick and Jane is fake, like no one lived that perfect life. So I like to play with the humor and kind of putting that on its ear a little bit.
And Jennifer, what is it about things that have had a previous life? I mean, yours, even some of it, it's not necessarily old, it's another artist's work or whatever. What is it, the fact that your objects have a previous life? And then we have a technical question for you, which is in the Q&A, people are asking, how do you attach textiles to wood? How do you attach your things to wood? But first, just in terms of things having had a previous life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not for me as much the vintage or the old as the story or the expression and how it gets layered with my own expression. So I can pick up something that's just been printed a few days ago, and that'll be very satisfying to me as well. And it's the relationships between materials. So it's the fact that I have, a drawing that somebody gave me or threw out and I took, and I have, a patterned piece of paper that I picked up on my travels or something, or a program from a theater production or something. And it's relating those things together that really do it for me, and then layering my own story on top of it. Technically, so a lot of my work is actually paper, which probably makes it a little bit easier to adhere. I do use a little bit of fabric, but most of it, even though a lot of it looks like fabric, a lot of it is paper. I work on Luan plywood a lot, so it's a very thin plywood, and I just prime it, and then I glue it. I glue it with Sobo glue, and if it's wood to wood, I glue it with wood glue. And then I try to reinforce all my gluing with some kind of physical attachment of either nails or tacks or stitches. I'll drill and stitch. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of everything to get them on. Each piece is different for me, so I don't have a real how-to thing, because each time I'm kind of reinventing.
So that makes it interesting too, to
Yeah,
constantly
for me.
vary your construction, makes it interesting. So one of the, I know the three of you met together and talked before this, and there are clearly threads of connection between all of you. And I'm just curious, from any of you, what was something that you noticed in that conversation when you talked to each other?
We all talked about our stashes and how to organize them or not organize them, and how we found things. So we were really coming at it. I think one difference from some other artists is we're really coming at it from materials, even though we're transforming those materials. So that was part of the conversation for sure.
Anyone else want to share anything from that conversation?
Oh, I just wanted to see more. I love Zoom because you get to peek behind people into their spaces. So I was asking Susan and Jennifer to show me more of their, the artist in their natural environment.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that you've mentioned, and I think you all do this, is you all take objects that have a context, and then somehow you translate it or transform it into your own story, which I think is interesting. So there's some kind of meaning before, and an inherent meaning in your materials, and then there's a new story being told. And where would you say you get your inspiration from for the stories that you're telling? Is it internal? Is it in response to the world around you? Is it a combination? And Susan, do you want to talk about that, where you get your inspiration?
I like the fact that Maggie also mentioned the sense of time. I honestly think that most of my work is about the sense of time. And I think a lot of people, even non-artists who are on social media nowadays, are getting that sense of time. When you automatically turn on Facebook and you see your memory from 9 years ago, and you are wearing the same shirt. Time seems to overlap on itself and be fascinating on how quickly it went by and how long it took from the beginning of this, this Zoom meeting to the day of today, and then how quickly the hours in the morning went, but then how slow the minutes right beforehand went. I think time is one of those things that inspires me. It challenges me. It lets me think about people who would have used these objects as everyday things, and makes me wonder about the things I use every day that are soon going to be vintage and soon looked at like a rotary dial.
Thank you. That's great. Now, I have so many questions I would ask you guys, but I want to make sure that I get to some of these things in the chat, because as this is artists talking mostly to artists, I assume in the audience, there are a lot of technical questions. So there are questions such as, how long does it take you to make a piece? What's your process? Like, do you go back and forth editing a piece? How large is your work? What do you do on the edges? Can you tell us about the glue? So those are just some of the things. So why don't we just, can we just sort of, as very quick run through, like, how long does it take you to make a piece? And each of you sort of use a particular example. A piece this big might take so long. I mean, that's a hard answer for me to answer, because sometimes it takes me years because I go back to a piece, and that's also an okay answer. All right. So does anyone want to share? How long does it take you to make a piece?
I'll jump in. I mean, and some of the technical things, my adhesive strategy, attachment strategy, I saw that go by in the Q&A. I love that term. I am just a slave to Wonder Under. I use it in all of my layers. So everything, I also like Wonder Under because it smooths out things. You can really get fabric to behave more like paper in a way. And so it's all fusing, and then afterwards sewing down the edges. I do a lot of rough edge because I want things to look a little off. And I don't put them, some things get framed, and smaller embroideries are framed, but the piece itself, or that large scale thing I showed, is just layers and layers of fabric. So you can turn it over and see the back. Like on my Instagram, I show the backs of things a lot because I think that's kind of fun for us to show each other. time-wise, everyone knows how long it takes. I'm pretty fast at stitching, but I stitch every day. There are a lot of times my in-studio time is the design process, and I start with a sketch, made, and or I start with something I love, like something that inspires me, and I start working out from there. And I work out the drawings ahead of time, transfer them over, with just old school, what is that? Like tracing paper, and just get everything the way I want it. Transfer it over to cloth with a Pigma pen, a fine pen, so then I can stitch it out very precisely. And then keep layering and working on it. But I usually work on more than one thing at a time so that I can mix up the ways my hands move to preserve my body. And then also, so if I get stumped, I think it's a balance of planning and then leaving some time for serendipitous decision making, and trancing out and figuring out where things go in a piece.
A back and forth. Jennifer, one of your pieces, first of all, do you work on more than one at a time? And just describe, what do you think, how long it takes you to do one?
It'd be really hard for me to say how long, to tell you the truth. And some of them, they get set aside, they come back. Usually I have several pieces that are in beginning stages that are just pinned up, and I'll randomly walk in the studio and pin something else to them. Sometimes I'll realize, oh, well, if I want these things all stitched together, I can do that part now, even if I don't know how they're all going to play in the finished piece. But time is really important to me because it informs my content. And so what happens is, as I'm working on a piece, a certain amount of, usually at least a month, goes by. So during that month, things happen in my personal life, things happen on the news, and things happen, with my friends and family. And those stories that I'm hearing from all those places start to come into the work. So that question of how long does something take, it takes as long as it takes those stories to gel, as well as the physical process. My work right now is about somewhere between 30 inches by 30 inches and maybe 40, not quite 40, like 42 by 42, somewhere in there. And then some of those long vertical pieces are taller, but so I tend to work in the same scale sort of for a while, and then I'll get bigger and I'll get smaller depending. And all the technical, yes, the edges are really important. I studied with Cynthia Shear, and I'll never forget that was her thing. Transitions and edges. So my edges are finished. You can see the piece from the side, and you'll get new information that you won't get from the front view. I'm really interested in how I transition from one area to another in the piece.
Jennifer,
that was something, can I jump in? That was one thing that I loved about Jennifer's work. I'd always seen it just frontal, and I thought it was a flat image, and she started showing me pictures, and there's all these hidden worlds when you get to look at around the corners, and it was really a lot of fun to discover that about her work.
Yeah, I remember you said in rehearsal that Jennifer said that she was encouraged to do some details that way, right? And actually, there's a technical question about the reflective material, Jennifer, that you use in the niche, and also about paper knitting.
Okay, so reflective material is actually just silver paper from, I think, Michael's or somewhere. So it's like poster board. It's a poster board that has a very highly reflective surface. I had a hardware store. I lived in a small town, and they would cut mirrors to any size I wanted, including like 2 inches by 6 inches. And, but that was difficult. And so I finally just found this other material, and it works just as well. And so and then the other question, sorry, remind.
It was about paper
knitting. Okay, so I knit on big needles, and I have paper yarn.
You make the paper yarn, or is it?
No, it's just it's like I don't spin it or make it, but if you Google paper yarn, you'll find it. And I actually had gotten quite a stash of it. It's sort of like raffia, only with more textures available to you. And the reason I use paper yarn rather than yarn is it sort of coordinates with my materials more. And it's also very easy for me to glue if that's, or wax. I also use wax as an adhesive depending on the piece. I usually use one or the other, either glue or wax, but so the paper yarn behaves more like the rest of my materials.
Great. These are all great answers. I'm sure there's much more that people would like to ask. We are getting very close to the actual hour of 3 o'clock. I might have one more question for Susan if we have time. Do I get, does someone want to give me a heads up? Astrid?
Thumbs up.
Heads up. Do we have 1 more minute, or do we need to say our goodbyes?
You can go for 5 more minutes, including goodbyes.
Okay.
Okay.
So I just have one more question, and that is for Susan. So in doing my research on you, I noticed you had this large, and you showed a picture of a corner of it, this very large installation with all of the vintage fabrics, vintage linens all stitched together. And I just was curious, there's a relationship between the body and work that encompasses you. And, of course, Maggie, you know this too, having, encircled the room with your textiles. But Susan, I was just curious as to what are people's responses when they make their way through those rooms of vintage textiles?
I'm anxious to find out myself. I was fortunate enough to make that installation called The Cocoon a couple of years ago and submitted it for an opportunity last year, which of course was canceled. But this year, right now in Lake City, South Carolina, in a competition called Art Fields, it's on view. And I made that for the intention of people walking through and responding and coming up with, and being in a place where you could share your own stories with your friends and relatives. The stories of the people in your family and your loved ones that stitched and collected those garments. I envisioned a place for mothers to share embroidery with daughters, and fathers to talk about, camping like Maggie's pieces and sleeping under that well-worn quilt. But this is really the first time it's gotten to be on view for more than 20 people, and I'm very excited about that. It was made with the anticipation of sharing it.
Congratulations, that sounds great. I can't wait to hear. So thank you to our presenters, a big thank you to our presenters, Maggy Rozycki Hiltner, Susan Lenz, and Jennifer Lee Morrow. So look them up and learn more about them. They have great websites, and there's a lot about them online. Also, thank you so much to our presenters, and and to our sponsors, and to SAQA for hosting us. And this recording will be available on YouTube in the next week. And next Wednesday's Textile Talk is Conversation with the Artists, Layered and Stitched, 50 Years of Innovative Art, hosted by Studio Art Quilt Associates. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our sponsors. It was wonderful. We learned a lot today. And we will be saying our goodbyes now. And if people who are on screen, if you'd like to give a wave, you can certainly give a wave. Thank you.
Thank you.